All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murachs, JavaScript, and jQuery, 3rd edition for the AWD Application and Web Development 1000 Web Technologies class. I'm on Chapter 6 of 18. I'm about a third of the way through the chapter, and we very quickly looked at a JavaScript FAQ application. Now we're going to talk about how to script forms and controls. You know that a form, such as what you see on here, contains one or more controls. It can have text boxes like you see here, labels like you see here, and a button like you see here, and other things. These controls are known as fields. So what we're going to learn in here is how to create this form with these controls. All right? So we're going to take this code that you see right here, and I'm going to grab this code, copy it to the clipboard. All right. And let's start up a new file. We'll paste that in. It looks like it's an email form. We've got an email list, so now we'll have an email form. All right. I'm going to put in basically the bare bones stuff that we need in here. So again, we will call this email form.html. Now there's been no CSS added to this. There's been no JavaScript added to this. So right now, it looks like that. Not very well formatted, etc., and it's fine. In its current form, it's just fine for where we currently are. All right, so let's take a look at it. Okay. This says we're going to add some CSS. Oh, that's the wrong file. That's what was copied in from the last one, so I'll just leave that blank because we'll add that later. Let's look at this. This says the form has both an ID and a name of email form, but the key thing here is the action. What this says is once we run this particular form, once we run it, and we click that button, I'm going to get an error message because it's trying to bring up a file called join.php, which doesn't exist. And that's what it's saying right here is the action is when you click the submit button, you're supposed to send the information that was in this form to a file called join.php. So it's really showing you a client-server relationship where our client is our form, and when we click it, we're attempting to send it out to a server to have a file called join.php do something with it. Don't worry about that right now. That the point was just to show you what was going on in there. So that's the URL. In fact, notice what it says here. So let's do this. Let's do something similar to what the author showed here. In other words, let's run it. And I'm going to put in here jpscott@rankin.edu and first name of Jeff, and I'm going to click the join our list. And you may or may not be able to see that in here, but it says email address equal jpscott %40, which is the @ rankin.edu, and first name equal Jeff. So it's passing that information that I just gave it, and it's passing that information to the join.php file, and it's showing it up in our address bar in what's called a query string because I used method equal get. If I had changed that and put in there method equal post instead of get, and I ran this again, and I put in the same stuff, jpscott@rankin.edu and Jeff, and I click join our list, now you'll notice the information is not passed up in the address bar in the query string. All right, so you get more protection if you use post, whereas if you use get, it shows everything. You can bookmark a get, you cannot bookmark a post. Because with a post, it packages that information in the HTTP or the Hypertext Transfer Protocol header. All right, so the name we put in there, we put in a name, and that can be referred to by either client-side code or server-side code. There's the name right there. the action, which is the URL of the file that we want to go to when we click the submit button, and the method. Just mentioned a little bit about post and get for you. All right. Now, as they mentioned in, going back, and I'm sorry I'm jumping back and forth here, but hopefully it's making more sense that way. All right, here are some terms that you should really understand then. What a form is, what controls on a form are, what a submit button does, what a reset button does, and let's quickly add a reset button just so you see it. Come back here. I'm going to just grab everything that we had here, and I'm going to paste it in. And I'm going to change this from submit to reset. The ID will just make this reset, and the value will be reset. All right. So these buttons are now going to run right together. So I'll put about 3 non-breaking spaces in between them. All right, just so they're set apart a little bit. All right, so there's the reset button I just had. I put some junk in here, I put some junk in here. I click reset, you can see what happens. All right. So when you work with text boxes, text areas, and selects, you've got a value property. And that basically is what that's going to grab the value that you put inside of the text box. All right? You should always set the name and the ID attributes for your controls to the same value. All right? After you use the value property of one of the objects to get the value string, you can use the length property if you need to get the number of characters in there. Okay? You can also work with, so there's an example of there's a text box. All right, there's a text area and a select list, and this is how you can work with them. You're going to see this in just a minute, okay? You can also work with radio buttons and checkbox objects. We should have worked with this stuff because this is the same stuff we went over in the HTML portion of the class. All right, and radio buttons and checkboxes have a value which, returns a string, and checked, which says whether or not something has been checked. There's some examples of radio buttons and checkboxes, and there's some code that you can use to process them. All right. Buttons, we already mentioned the submit, which submits the form and it's dated to the server, and reset, which resets the controls back to their starting or default values. Focus is what happens when you move your cursor to a field. That field gets the focus. If you look right here, I think it's worth going over this. If I do this and I run this right here, now that email address field has the focus. When I click here, so when I go from here to here, now this field gets a focus event, and that field that I just left gets what's called a blur event, which happens when you remove the focus. All right, and you can put all sorts of code in neither, either, or both. Some common events: on focus is when the control receives the focus. On blur is when it loses the focus. On click is when you click the control. On double click is when you double click the control. On change is when you change the value of a control. And on select is when you select the text in a text box or text area. All right. So next they're going to go through this registration application. It's a little bit more complex if you see it right here. There's several controls on here, and what you can see is if an entry is required, there'll be a red asterisk that's going to be displayed to the right of the control. Okay? And once you click the register button, the system will check to make sure that any required fields have been checked, and if they are not, all right, the system will catch that. So if we look on here, there's HTML, there's a little CSS, and there's quite a bit of JavaScript. So, as always, let's grab the HTML here. We'll put it in yet another file. We will grab from our previous file here our stuff at the beginning. This really shouldn't have said FAQ anymore. This page was an email form. All right. This page is now going to be a register application. All right. And let's go down to the bottom. Just grab these two tags. And we will save this as register.html. I'm going to close a bunch of the stuff that I'd opened previously. All right, so we'll save this as register.html. There's that. Got some stuff at the top now. I don't know what it's going to look like when we run it. Pretty ugly. Okay, again, we have not put in everything, but you can see what it looks like right now. So let's get down to here. And I think on the next page we're going to have more code. There it is. All right, so we'll grab that. Copy that to the clipboard. Now it should look more complete, but there's been no CSS that's really been added to it yet. All right, so that's got everything in here. You can see that. That's good. Close a few of these because I got way too many things open here. All right. Okay, move this over. Doesn't look too bad right now, really. There's a lot of work that could be done on this, but I don't really care right now. I guess that should be moved over to here. All right. Okay. Next, I think we're going to add a CSS file, and then we're going to add a JavaScript file. But that CSS file, I believe, is very small. That's it. And that's just saying that anything with an ID, any span that's inside of an ID called registration form should have a color of red. And this will work out well because it'll allow me to show you the kind of the before and after pictures. All right, and what do I mean? Get it much easier to show you. Here's the before picture. Notice those asterisks. Now I'm going to come back here and I'm going to save this as register.css. Okay, I've got to add that over to here. So let's add that. Register.css. Okay, now we'll go back to this and we'll refresh, and you see how they turn red. Okay, all right. Now, next we're going to go to our JavaScript. Quite a bit of JavaScript here, so this is going to probably take a bit for me to copy all of this in. And I think I might have skipped over one. There we go. I think this is the rest of it here. So we're going to call this register.js. right? Then we've got to go back and add that into here, register.js. Now let's see if the magic, it all works here. So I'm going to click register without putting in those fields, and you see I get these error messages. All right, that's a good start. So let's take a look at the actual code that's here. You've got the use strict at the beginning, all right, which means that we're not going to allow the user to be a sloppy coder. We've got our alias function here, which will allow us to use the $sign to substitute for document.getElementById. We've got a routine here called process entries that does the data validation for all the controls and then submits the form if all of the controls were valid. All right. We've got another event handler in here that's called reset form that does just that. It resets the form, so it puts the asterisks back. And then we've got our onload event, which basically attaches process entries to you clicking the register button, and it attaches the on click to the reset form. All right. Again, I realize we're going through this very quickly. All right, but again, I'm already at 17 minutes and I still have about 20 slides to go from this chapter. All right. One property of the element interface that you can use to either set or return HTML content is inner HTML. If that confuses you, look at it this way. What they're saying is we can use the inner HTML property to actually write code, to write stuff out to a web page. All right, and since it's inner HTML, it can write either just regular text or it can write actual HTML content with HTML tags. So the next example that's here displays a list of images. All right, it lets you return or set the contents of an HTML element. This first example will show you how to add content to an HTML element. In this case, 4 images are added to an HTML element with an ID of image list. All right. So in other words, in here to begin with, there's nothing. There's no LI tags. It's empty. So to set the actual HTML content, we assign the content to the inner HTML property. Okay? So that's saying that when you load this, instead of having this be empty, have it fill up with these 4 images, so indeed it looks like this. If you had made any of these here for the source, if you had set any of these to empty, the empty string, that would be a way to remove them. All right? Now, in the last chapter, in Chapter 5, we went over how to view source code. We also learned how to hit the F12 key to go in and take a look at the stuff that's in there, like this. All right? So remember, if you're using Chrome, you can use the Elements panel to see the changes to the DOM that the HTML code has made. What does that mean? That means let's go back to our code. All right, we're right here, and let's hit our F12 key. Okay, and let's make this a little smaller. And then let's hit our Elements tag. And that shows us the stuff that's in here. Okay? So you'll notice if I take my mouse and I hover over something, in here, it'll show me, for lack of better words, what I'm hovering over. So if I come over here into main, okay, and let's see, what do I have here? Notice I'm putting my mouse over this field as required, and then you can see that this field required up here will all of a sudden be blue. Mobile phone, etc. So this Elements panel displays the HTML nodes for the document. All right, so it's showing how everything is set up in here. All right, we're coming toward the end of this chapter. All right. So what we're asked to do here next is have this register application that has a table in it. All right. So when the user clicks the register button, the application performs data validation to make sure it's filled out okay. If it's correct, it submits the form. If it's not, it shows you what was wrong, but it shows you what was wrong in a table down below here. All right. This is very much the way that we're doing stuff on the client here, but this is very much the way that a lot of server stuff is done. All right. So basically what we do is we come in and we add we add at the bottom of our form. Let's see if we can do that. Let's go back to our register form, which is here. And then at the bottom, right before main, we're going to put in here H2 ID equal registration header a blank space and our H2 tag, because right now there's nothing in it, and then a table tag with a registration info in it, and then end the table tag. Now, when we run this, I can be very much assured it's not going to look any different than it did before, because it has a couple empty elements in it. So you don't see anything, but there's actually a table down there with nothing in it. We want to go to our CSS, and I'm going to copy this line right here because we're almost going to duplicate it. In fact, we can do this. Registration form span, registration info span. So that says for either one of those, make it red. And I guess we have to replace the JavaScript the way that it looks. So I'm going to take everything that's in here now for the JavaScript, everything, and comment it out. All right. And then I'm going to come over to the book here where they have the next thing of JavaScript. Which is right here. And I'm going to comment, bring all this stuff in. Notice there's a bunch of if statements here, and those if statements are checking whether or not the required fields have values in them or not. Hopefully I'm not forgetting to copy in anything. Sorry about that. That's the previous part 1. Okay. And I should have one more page worth, and that's right here. All right, let's save this. Go back to our HTML. We have saved our CSS. We have saved our HTML. I'm going to run this. Now notice if I click register, well, I was supposed to get the results down there, and I did not. Register.js, register.js, it's been saved. My guess is I probably forgot something that I need. Oh, well, that's not going to hurt anything, though. Well, let's look at the code anyway. All right? Still think there's something to be said for actually looking at it. Again, we've got the use strict at the beginning. All right, we've got our alias function here. We've got our process entry, which starts by declaring variables used for the function. We declare variables required, header and HTML, then we've got a required in our message. Then the next things that are in here, that's pretty much, this is what we did in the last one. All right. Then this starts checking whether or not we put values into the stuff that's here. All right. And if there was anything missing, it should be writing this table. For some reason, it's not. And again, I'm not exactly sure why. All right. This is doing the reset for us, and this is doing the association here. All right. Again, I wish I knew what the problem was. Yeah, it's not grabbing anything. It's not even changing these. So there's a problem in here. So I apologize. I tried to go through and go over some of this stuff with you. All right, and that pretty much is it for the chapter. So when I come back in just a couple minutes, I'm going to go over Chapter 7, which is a much shorter chapter. Chapter 7 is on how to work with links, images, and timers. And that will complete Part 1 of the text. Okay, so I'll be back with that very shortly.